All right. Let me see if I can get this. Are we live? Live. Hmm. Oh, can you back it up a screen? Because that's the tight one. Did it back up screen? Hey, that's the big one. It's number two, I think. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we'll get this thing going. Now it went back. There it goes. Huh. I guess we got it. I don't know why it never puts the title up there. You get it working one way, and then they do an update, and it will never work the same again. Anyway, this is again part of our Advent, looking at the Christmas story, part two. And I don't know what you would call this, maybe hope and waiting. Um, I don't know. I hope I hope I don't know where they're at, but I hope a lot of people are going to church. They don't have to come here, but I hope they're going somewhere, not just staying home. You know, it's important that we gather out. It really and truly is. As a matter of fact, it's not just important. We're kind of commanded to meet out. It's necessary. Um, and I just, in our time, I always think of how many people are full of worry and full of anxiety, and the church is the last place they go. And I understand there's a lot of religious stuff that goes on, but it's it's always like, well, I've worked all week and I need my day to rest. And that day is generally on a Sunday. And I can just tell you this, I have been brutally tired through the week. And sometimes on Sunday mornings and getting lessons ready until 4 or 5 in the morning. But I have never not left refreshed. Or even when I go home afterwards, I sleep with a sleep that I hadn't had in a long time, whether you guys even know it or not. And so when people always give me their excuses, I just know you got to have your priorities in the right spot. And honestly, it's a lot of people, they just don't. Um, the convenience of sleeping in on Sunday mornings. Anyway, in today's lesson, Hope and Waiting, growing up here in the mountains and then living in Chicago for a little while, up in Indiana, not in Chicago, but Valparaiso. I don't know if you guys have been up there. Maybe some of you guys have been up there. It's flat as a plate. I mean, it's just flat. You stand there and you look, and it's just flat. Out through Iowa and all that. I used to think, if I could lock my steering wheel in where it wouldn't move and get front end alignment, I could probably sleep for an hour and a half straight. You guys know what I'm talking about? I know you see pictures of Chicago and places like that, but when you get up there in the Midwest, Indiana, out through Iowa and all them places, there's nothing. Corn and soybeans, it's all. Just forever. And, a lot of times when you're traveling on the mountains, you can kind of gauge and it feels like a little bit. But sometimes on the plains, what's the kids say? Are we there yet? How much longer? Are we there yet? And, Christmas time and winter time is a lot of those flat plains, I look, last couple Wednesdays we've missed, and you look and it's like, well, daggone, horrible weather. I look at the forecast next Wednesday and I'm like, it's horrible. What about Monday and Tuesday? It was good then, and then Wednesday comes in, and then you look out, Wednesday again. What in the world's going on here? And so you get these long stretches of waiting. And I don't know about you guys, but I hate waiting. I know Tracy, she likes to go to the store down there. It's at the airport down there in Bristol called Hamrick's. You guys know where that is? Have you guys ever shopped in Hamrick's? You could go into Hamrick's when they open at 9 a.m. and at 9:10 be ready to check out. And at 2:45, you're checked out. I mean, you think I'm exaggerating, but there's a line in that store that loops around and loops back and goes over by the belts and down through the men's clothes and all the way back over this way and coming up and going around and outside around to the motel parking lot and back around. And I'm thinking, all I want is this little bag of popcorn. I'll put it back. A year or so ago, Tracy and I, she always gets me in these predicaments. She wanted to go see the lights in Bluefield. I was like, hey, we're up here. We'll go see the lights in Bluefield. You guys know where I'm talking about? We didn't know they had you loop to Brown, plumb back over into Bluefield, West Virginia, and all the way back in Bluefield, Virginia, all the way back to Springville and back up. We waited in line, waited and waited and waited. And we thought we got here early. And one thing is, once you get in line, you can't get out. Well, I guess you can, but you're going to have to run over some things. And, this waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And, this is a thing that I wonder. And a lot of people, they like the excitement, because is there any excitement in waiting? If there is, you guys are going to have to teach me, because I just don't find the joy in it. And, a lot of churches and a lot of sermons, and, we want to skip by that stuff. And I know that's why I promise you, if this service was way more exciting and all that, people come because people like excitement. Guarantee you, yesterday evening about 5 o'clock when Graham was playing the state championship game, there was thousands of people gathered out in Salem, Virginia, in the cold, in the coveralls to watch high school football. Nothing wrong with that. I've did it before. But on Sunday mornings, nah. I mean, you understand here. And this waiting, and people always ask, well, when is the end? The disciples ask, when is the end going to be? When? Just tell us. Let's skip all the waiting stuff. Just tell us, when is the end going to be? Just tell us. I mean, tell us when the rapture is going to be. A guy asked us this question the other day on the radio show live. When's the rapture going to be? I said, buddy, don't quit your job. Pay your house note, Pay your car insurance. Go ahead and shop for Christmas. It's okay. You got time. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure. And maybe, it's like, hey, if the rapture happens, I don't have to buy Christmas. Well, I'm pretty sure you're going to miss out. So go ahead and buy it, So this waiting and flat plains, just driving and seeing the same things over and over and over, this corn, the soybeans. I remember, just tell you another little story real quick. One time we go down, we go down, and I didn't know it was the last time. And again, it's Tracy's. Tracy's always leading me in bad places. Let's go down to Pigeon Forge on Saturday and let's do some shopping. Hey, it's not too far away. Let's go to what they call him, Tanger. Yeah. We had to park in Knoxville because there wasn't any parking. I'm just telling you. And you know what? You know what I get to do? I get to drop them off. And then I get to circle the wagons for hours waiting on somebody to move out of a parking spot. So this, you got to imagine, this Christmas story. Imagine, I told you last week, this Christmas story, Matthew got a hold of and said, man, this Christmas story began 600 or 700 years ago. Imagine waiting 600 or 700 years. My gosh, I remember when I was a kid, when it gets October, you're like, how many days? How many days? How many days? I want to go back to the prophet Isaiah real quick. Isaiah chapter 11. And I just want to read this. Isaiah chapter 11. Let's see, yeah, I got Isaiah 11 in here. I'm going to read verses 1 through 9. Now this is a poem, if you will, of hopeful waiting. The prophet, you remember last week he said, this young woman she's going to have a child, and everything's going to be fine. And remember, we went through that story, and here's this prophet. Then a shoot will spring from the stem of Jesse, a branch from his roots will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and strength, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. He will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what his eyes see, nor make decisions by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he will judge the poor, and decide with fairness for the humble of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Also righteousness will be the belt around his hips, his faithfulness the belt around his waist. The wolf will dwell with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the young goat. The calf and the young lion and the fattened steer will be together, and a little boy will lead them. Also the cow and the bear will graze. Their young will lie down together. The lion will eat straw like the ox. The nursing child will play by the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child will put his hand on the viper's den. And they will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. For the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Now we quote them verses and we look at them, but do you not have a longing in your heart? I do. I have a longing in my heart, and I want to share that longing with others, and I fail to get the message through, and I'm like, I want other people to be as excited about the Lord Jesus as I get excited about the Lord Jesus. Especially this time of year and resurrection and all them things, and I would like to change people's thinking and understanding and think, my gosh, what a privilege it is for us to get together out and meet and learn. And do you know what it's, how can I put this? How can I put this? On Christmas Eve, we will go over to Tracy's family, and all the family will be gathered out there, and we will have dinner. There will be laughing, and they will be cutting up, and there will be all of this. It will be joy. If you was walking by, you would just hear laughter and joy and smell the good food. If you want to know what it's like to be with the Lord, that's what it's like. It's like a dinner with family and friends. I laid back. I mean, honestly, if you can get this in your head, and you guys know we get to have dinner with the Lord every week. If we could just get it in our head, it's not some religion. I mean, this is why people miss it. This is why people don't get it, and the waiting. And we're going to look at the story today. And we hear this poem of Isaiah, and he puts, as the waters cover the sea, do you not long for that? That we watch the movies, and we see Ebenezer Scrooge walking down on Christmas morning, and he's happy and giving stuff away because something has happened to him. And our desire is that something would happen to these people. An encounter, a fresh encounter. And I would say this after reading Isaiah chapter 11, may we all hope with such a divine waiting this year. So now, with that divine hope as the backdrop, I want to talk about fertility issues, being forgotten, when silence is golden, and then passing the story along. So we're going to be in Luke chapter 1 today. Luke chapter 1. And I'll read to you verse 5. In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Now both of these, Zechariah and Elizabeth, are from the priestly lineage here. Remember, this is a Jewish story. I mean, so we get their pedigree right out of the gate. And verse 6, they were both righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord. I mean, Luke right out of the gate here, verse 6, he introduces us to Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth, and he tells us, hey, listen, guys, in case you didn't know it, both of them are of the priestly origin here, of which division Zechariah is. And just so you know that his wife Elizabeth is a direct descendant of Aaron and his daughters. I mean, I just want you to know. And they're both righteous, and they're both blameless. That's amazing. Do these things not hit you sometimes? I mean, does not your religious elbow want to jump up and say, wait a minute, Paul says we've all sinned and come short of the glory of God. Wait a minute, nobody's good. Nobody. But Luke says, time out, guys. I want to tell you about some people. Now, when I'm reading this, do you get the hint that maybe these are good people? Maybe these are just humble people serving the Lord, that have been serving the Lord their entire life, and they love the Lord. I mean, do you get the idea that maybe they love the Lord? I do. Right out of the gate, Luke wants to pull us into the story and say, hey, these people really love the Lord, and they're good people in the sight of God. I mean, God's view of them is they're blameless, and they keep all the requirements of the law. But he gives us another verse, verse 7, and I want to write in there, instead of and, I want to write but, yet, but, and. They had no child because Elizabeth was infertile, and they both were advanced in years. That's what I like to tell people when I go somewhere. How old are you? I'm not old, I'm just advanced. I'm just advanced. Advanced in years. They had no child. Now, I mean, this is huge. We need to understand the significance of this statement. Elizabeth is not able to conceive, and that's not an accidental anecdote in this story here. In fact, at the end of the story here, when Elizabeth does become pregnant, I'm going to go read this verse. I mean, this is, you know the end of the story, but verse 25 here in chapter 1, this is the way, she makes the statement, this is the way the Lord has dealt with me in the days when he looked with favor upon me to take away my disgrace from among the people, to take away my disgrace. That's how she looks at it when she becomes pregnant. That's because in the ancient world, now you got to hear this. Being able to have children was a big deal. And it still is. Guys, don't get me wrong. It still is. But maybe then it had a different thought behind it. I don't know. Maybe it still does today, especially with religious people. And we know this was very important because there's a lot of stories about women who can't conceive in the scriptures, right? I mean, we know that. Abraham and Sarah right out of the gate. But in this ancient world here, this infertility was often seen not just as bad luck, or a lack of blessing. It was often understood as punishment from the gods. Now you got to remember, we got Jews and they're surrounded by all these Gentiles and pagans and all this other stuff. And you know, right out of the gate, every woman in Hebrew culture, going back to Genesis 2, remember that prophecy, and every one of them thought they were going to be the one who brought forth the Messiah. So they just wanted to have a child, especially a boy child. And then when you couldn't, and then the pagans around them, and we know how they kind of thought, and they would just think, you know, it's kind of this mindset. It's like maybe you've done something wrong to deserve this reality. And then on top of that, remember we have this introduction here of Zechariah and Elizabeth, of this priestly royalty here, so to speak. When you're a priest who serves God professionally and your wife is from this priestly line of Aaron and you're still childless, oh my gosh. There's this likely and unfortunate ignorant stigma that came along with all that. I mean, the whisper, surely. You guys, one of you must have did something really wrong because, God, look, you're the right lineage. You're in God's presence. One of you guys has got to have something. And I don't know, maybe you don't have to raise your hand. Have you ever felt that way? I mean, sometimes it just seems like nothing goes your way, and you think, what have I done? I mean, have you ever thought, what have I done to deserve this? And then, other people are looking and they're saying, like Job's miserable comforters, oh, I know. I remember you did this and this, and, But Luke here, the doctor, Luke, he gets it and he goes out of his way to make sure that you and I don't jump to this obvious conclusion. He puts it right on the page, right in black and white for us to see it. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord. There, verse 6. Luke doesn't want us to be confused here. He doesn't want us to miss this. He doesn't want us to say, it's her fault. He wants us to understand it's not her fault and it's not Zechariah's fault. Sometimes it's just the way things are. It's just the way things are. Um, just tell you a little story. One of my cousins this week, I think it was earlier in the week, she posted, everybody pray. You know how you don't really get any info, just pray. Something's going on. And, you don't want to say the C word. But, something's happening. There's a lump, and there's blood, and there's one of the doctors telling you go get this immediately. And, there's a lot involved in something like this because, they got children, they got parents. And, when something like this hits, boy, it almost puts the family on hold, doesn't it? I mean, everything stops. Now, wait a minute. We gotta see what's going on here. And I know there were some people in my old where I came from would have started pointing out all the sins and the reason why that this is happening. And when I talked to my brother Jeff down the road, he said, it's hard to get out of that habit because, it's born. So every time something happens to you, wow, I know what I did to deserve this, and I know why this is, you can go down that road. But, I think one thing that we should be reminded of here, that faith is not a transaction. And that when you do struggle, and I'm just saying that you do struggle, it's not because God blames you. Life is hard enough without all this religious baggage being piled on more and more, weighing us down, especially at Christmas time, Because, these thoughts are going to, what did I do? What did I do? What have I done, But at the same time, while Luke is working to dismantle that narrative, he's also setting the stage for this story. It's a good story. And I think sometimes even when you know deep down in your bones that it's not your fault, that we are like Elizabeth, blameless, but once you've heard it enough times, once you've grew up in it, and guys, these things start early. We've made the mistake. Has anybody ever used Christmas to discipline kids? Honestly, this is what we do with something so fantastic, so miraculous as Christmas. What do we tell our kids when they're acting up? When we say Santa Claus, we might as well say God. Honestly, we're saying Santa Claus is watching. If you wanted something nice, you got to, So we use this. And then, so what happens as you grow, you grow up into this. And as you grow up into this, what happens when things don't go your way? Those seeds was planted a long, long time ago. And they've been growing, and they've been festering, and you hear it. And, it just becomes part of culture. Even though you go to church and the good preacher says it's not your fault, yet for 50 years you've heard, he's watching. He's watching. Old Santa Claus in the sky, Mr. Judge up there with the big long beard. He's just waiting to drop the bomb on you because you know how he is. And once you've accepted that narrative about the world, and that narrative that is, and tell me if this is not the way, and it's hard. It's really hard because there's this narrative that goes on, hey, you get what you deserve. You guys ever heard that? What's the word they use nowadays? They've used it for a long time. Karma? Huh? Karma, right. And boy, we could even pull a little bit out of Galatians and say, you reap what you sow, right? I mean, here it is. So was Paul a believer in karma? I mean, it kind of makes you wonder and go back and look. But, most people, when they see bad things happen to people, what's the first thing I know? That, they're not in relationship, they're this. And honestly, in our society, it's hard to stop those thoughts from seeping in. It's hard. All of that sets the background of this story. A righteous, blameless couple who love the Lord, who serve the Lord, but they wonder if their predicament is really their fault. So you kind of get the story here. Old Zechariah, he's at work. He's in the temple. He's burning incense as the worshipers gather outside to pray. Let me read it. Verse 8. Now it happened that while he was performing his priestly service before God in the appointed order of his division, according to the custom of the priestly office, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. The whole multitude of the people were in prayer outside at the hour of the incense offering. Now an angel of the Lord appeared to him standing to the right of the altar of incense. Zechariah was troubled when he saw the angel, and fear gripped him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard." I'll stop with that. We'll go back and look at this some more. And guys, this kind of reminds me a little bit last week. Remember we were talking about Joseph, and the angel appeared to Joseph and said, "Don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife." And I want to say this. In the Bible, people tend to be afraid of angels. And rightly so. And if we read the scriptures, if I was asking about, what does an angel look like? You may all give me the same kind of, it's a big tall guy. And he's got a robe on, he's got wings. But it's hard to get a consistent picture of angels across the scriptures, because in their first appearance of angels, they show up, a lot of conversations in the book of Genesis, and they show up just like regular folks. You remember knocking on the door at Lot's house? "Hey, Lot, y'all need to come with us." I mean, you would think everybody would notice, and probably the men of that town wouldn't have had anything to do with them if the angels would have been about 15 foot tall, glowing white wings, big muscles. I doubt the men of the town would have come up and said, "We want those men," right? They just look like folks. The men that come to visit Abraham, they just look like people. But then you flip the book over to Ezekiel, and oh my goodness, you get this monstrous conglomerations. They got many eyes and many wings and wheels, and oh my gosh, we can't even draw a picture of them. Lion heads and all of this stuff. The book of Isaiah, they seem like winged messengers. Sometimes they show up in the middle of the temple, like here in Luke. But generally, even if the form is not particularly terrifying, I could understand that the sudden, out of the blue arrival of angels, to say the least, would be very unsettling, to say the least. And I understand in the standard angelic greeting in scriptures, "Do not be afraid, fear not." That makes sense to me. Does it make sense to you? It would make sense to me. You remember the angel shows up to Mary Do not be afraid, Mary. You found favor with God, for example. But just like with the angel showing up to Joseph, and now again today, do not be afraid is about far more than just being startled by seeing an angel. What was Joseph afraid of? I mean, he wasn't so much afraid of the angel. I mean, look what he's got ahead of him if he takes Mary to be his wife. Oh my God. I'm going to have the rest of my life dealing with people calling her names. You know, I'm going to have all this responsibility. I mean, you're telling me this is the Messiah, the King. Oh, whew. Yeah, I mean, I just want to go build decks and chairs and stuff, and you know. Joseph, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife. Joseph, this situation that's in front of you, this predicament you find yourself in, I know that it's scary. But don't be afraid of all that. Trust her. So it wasn't about Joseph being afraid of the angel. It was what he was really afraid of. So in verse 13, this greeting comes, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Can you give me the NIV version up there? I just want to show you something. It's these little words here. I don't know if you noticed the difference, but if you're looking up there, the angel of the Lord said to him, now that's a colon, right? And then quotes, do not be afraid, Zechariah, and then there's a colon. You see that colon or semicolon? Your prayer has been heard. Do you know that in the Greek, that semicolon between Zechariah and your is a Greek word? Now, I don't know what all translations you have back there. You don't have the Young's literal translation, do you? YLT. How about, do you know what all translations you got? Is the Darby? Put the Darby up there. Maybe it's got it. I don't have it either. You got the Weymouth? That's the Message. What? Tell me the translations you've got again. Wait a minute, you got to go slow. What's the first one? AM what? Okay, what's the next one? What is it? Okay. Put that one up. I don't know what it is. HCSB. Huh? It won't come up? Huh? Oh, well. Huh. Well, anyway, now in the King James, it gives us a little word there. Which is diot, which is, I know this is really interesting, it's a subordinating conjunction, but it's a fancy way of saying because. Now, a lot of times in the Greek text, as it's translated over into the, there it is. There's in the Amplified. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah, because your petition is heard. Your prayer is heard. Now, that was a colon in the NIV, and the word because, and I looked this up in the literal translation of the Greek. It's because, but your King James will say, for your prayer was heard. But really, it says, don't be afraid, Zechariah, because your prayer has been heard. Now, that's an important statement. Again, the angel isn't addressing him being afraid of the angel. He's ignoring all that, just like with Joseph, and he's moving to what really is at the heart of the matter here. Zechariah's biggest fear was really the angel, Zechariah and Elizabeth's biggest fear. They were afraid that no one had been listening. No one had been listening. I don't know if you've ever had these thoughts before. Have you ever been praying and wondered that? I mean, maybe you got more faith than I do. Maybe you just got it all together. But I mean, sometimes, and I mean, this is their biggest fear. And the angel goes right past his appearance, right past the blinding light and the wings and whatever else he shows up in the temple with, and goes right straight to the heart of the matter, right straight to the point. Zechariah, you've not been ignored. You and Elizabeth are not forgotten. You and Elizabeth haven't been forsaken. God has been listening to you all along. And that kind of says something to me here. The things that really scare us. I mean, what is it that really scares you? And there rarely are the things that need these movie special effects to visualize, I always used to wonder why the kids wanted to go see scary movies. Why do we like to be scared? I don't think anybody with any sanity likes to be scared. And so what are the things that really scare us? I mean, really deep down scare us. And, relationships. Being alone, that alone feeling, right? Just being alone, knowing that we're ignored. I mean, what kind of feeling is that? The parts of our lives that we keep secret, that we don't share with anyone, feelings that we keep covered up and tucked away, things that we're too afraid to name. All of those. I don't know if you ever deal with the what ifs. I'm telling you, you can get in a mess with those things. And sometimes these clouds of cultural suspicion can become internalized, and the result of that is this self-imposed shame. I mean, you get what I'm saying? The end result of this is I'm no good. I'm nothing. I'm worthless. It really is my fault. The reason this is happening, it's my fault. I mean, I go back, and there's stories, and all these things I'm saying, you can go find a story. Like I said, you can prove anything with the Bible because you can go in the book of Jonah. What happened in the book of Jonah? Man, there's a big storm going on, and what happens to Jonah? And what does Jonah say? It's my fault. Throw me overboard and the sea will be, oh yeah. So, you can start thinking everything's about you. It's all my fault. And this is part of the blame game. This is what Satan does. And look, you might think, oh man, he's just making this stuff up. Satan is very, very good at his job. He's very, very subtle. And he can convince you real easy it's your fault. God is really holding back that prayer. I mean, God has really turned his back. He's really not listening. Why should you pray to him? And that's the way this righteous and blameless, childless couple can slowly come to believe that they are the problem. They are why God doesn't answer them. They're why God has left them on their own. And I love that this angel, this messenger of God, and that's what an angel is, right? It's a messenger of God. We've went over this before. And I love that this one who speaks on behalf of God skips past the 1,000 obvious reasons to be scared and goes straight to the deepest, most hidden fear imaginable. One that a professional priest can never acknowledge publicly, that maybe God doesn't listen. Maybe it really is my fault. And the divine message is, and it's to us today, that don't be afraid. God does. He does hear. He does listen. And I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking of those scenarios that we talked about earlier, and maybe you have some of this fear that you've been forgotten by God. Or maybe God isn't listening. I used to think in my mind that of all the people that have sinned in the world, mine was the worst. Or maybe, God would have mercy on others and not me because, he would just look at me and shake his head. And I hope you can hear the Spirit of God in this moment from this story saying to all of us, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. When you pray, God stops to listen. Imagine that. Do you ever think about that? The busy God stops to listen. Even when the story unfolds in ways that you didn't expect, or maybe you didn't even want, because sometimes things don't always go the way that we want. The point is, we are never alone in the midst of it. Remember last week, Emmanuel, God with us. And you remember the story wasn't about the miraculous birth or any of that stuff. The story was about the witness of God. The witness. Can you get a hold of this? The witness of God. And sometimes that's the harder thing to believe, that we are not really forgotten, that God does hear. Let me go on and read here. Verse 13, but the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah, because your prayer has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall name him John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice over his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord, and he will drink no wine or liquor, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit while still in his mother's womb. And he will turn many of the sons of Israel back to the Lord their God. And it is he who will go as a forerunner before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of fathers back to their children, and the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Again, he's quoting from the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 40, I believe, because Zechariah and Elizabeth are parents, not of Jesus. You know who their baby's name is? John the Baptist. His name will be John. John, who will prepare the way for Jesus. John, who will baptize Jesus. And John, who will, as Jesus, find himself on the wrong side of the law of the day and end up being beheaded. But before all that, just like Jesus, John is this miraculous baby for unexpected parents at Christmas. He's a miracle baby. Except sometimes good news seems to be too good to be true. I just read all of those verses, but they just go in one ear and out the other. But sometimes when it's too good to be true, especially when you've been waiting as long as Zechariah and Elizabeth, because we read they were old, they're advanced in age. They've been waiting. And especially when you're starting to believe that this long journey through this flat lands through all these plains with no child has been your fault. Somehow it's been your fault. You've heard the whispers. I'm sure every time Elizabeth goes to the market, they're whispering behind her back a little bit. I wonder which of them. Why has God closed their womb? So Zechariah, now unafraid of the angel, still finds himself very afraid that God is not listening. So he asks this question in verse 18. So Zechariah says to the angel, how will I know this? For I'm an old man. My wife is advanced in years. Come on here. Let's be real here. All of these years, I'm 85 and the wife is 84. I've been doing this for a long, long time, and I know you've appeared to me today, but, I know the story of Abraham, and, that was Abraham. We call Abraham Father Abraham. We call him Father. There ain't nobody going to say Father Zechariah. It's Father Abraham, and we know Isaac, and we know Jacob, and Moses, and David, and all of that, but who are we? We've heard all the rumors. We know that God punishes, and we know, we know somehow this is our fault. This is our lot in life. We've accepted it, and you come telling me this good news? You've got to give me more proof than this, buddy. Can you see old Zechariah talking to this guy? You got to give me some proof more than this, buddy. You ever think about this? And I think it's a pretty good question. I would probably ask that question myself. But the old angel here, he's not impressed. And he's going to remind Zechariah a little bit something. Almost Zechariah get a little big for his britches. And verse 19, the angel answered him and says, by the way, my name is Gabriel. Maybe you've heard of that. I'm just not some Joe Schmuck angel here. I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God. I just want you to know that where I stand, in the very presence of God. And I was sent, personal message here, to speak to you and to bring you this good news. And behold, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day when these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled at their proper time. Now, not a long conversation. It's pretty short, a few verses on the page. Now, can you imagine Zechariah coming out, unable to speak? Here's the guy, he's 85 years old. I don't know how old he is, and he's coming out of the temple. And he's obviously doing something because the people recognize something is different about this guy. He can no longer speak. He's gesturing with his hands and, maybe grabbing his throat, and he's... Let me go on and read here. Verse 21. Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah, and they were wondering at his delay in the temple. But when he came out, he was unable to speak to them, and they realized that he had seen a vision in the temple, and he repeatedly made signs to them and remained speechless. Can you imagine trying to make a sign? What did you see, Ezekiel? Wings, halo. I'm speaking this out, but how are you going to, halo, ding, and, wings, and... What, Ezekiel, man? He's been in communion wine or something. I don't know. We don't understand. He saw something in there. And when the days of his priestly service were concluded, he went back home. Now imagine all of this. And, just a little side note here. Imagine now he's got to tell his wife, Elizabeth, who, I'm speculating maybe he's 84 years old. You know what, honey? We got to make a baby. Now, how is he going to describe this to her? He can't talk. Is he going to write her a note? We need to We need to go make a baby. I'm sure she's going to be like, you're crazy. You're old. I'm old. We're advanced in age. I mean, but I mean, I want you to hear a little bit of the comedy that's in the story. It's okay to laugh. And I mean, Sarah laughed. It's okay to laugh a little bit. I just wonder, and I know God laughs, and I know He has, joy, and He laughs because we laugh, or we laugh because He laughs. And some of these stories, there's comedy in the story there, because you're sitting back saying, wait a minute, how is he going to go home and try to explain to his wife that she needs to sleep with him so that they can have a baby? Now, a couple things here. First, I love that the angel uses this very specific term here back in verse 19. The term is good news. The good news. He's using this term good news to describe this pregnancy right on the doorstep of the birth of Jesus. And it is this term, evangelion, which is the term for gospel. And that's very important, guys, because the good news is more than just religious in the Bible. It's things are flourishing everywhere. When I think of that, I think of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. And if you don't know who Obed-Edom is, David's trying to bring up the ark, and Uzzah dies, so he takes the ark. He don't know what. And I just love the fact that they put the ark and they just drop it off by some guy. We never heard of this guy before, never hear of him again. It's like, hey, knocking on the door and said, hey, we got this ark of God out here. Can we leave it in your house for a few months while we figure out how to bring, this is our whole religious ideology is around this ark. And, our one guy just died. Can we leave this in your house? And Obed-Edom says, yeah, okay. Put it in the living room in there. And then everything come to life around Obed-Edom. I mean, he's calling neighbors. I mean, I got watermelons this big, tomatoes this big. Y'all to see my potatoes. I mean, the sheep are reproducing, the goats are reproducing, the cheese is the best in the world, the sweet milk, everything. What's going on? I don't know. This thing is sitting over here. I mean, this is good news, right? Good news. And I can tell you something about gospel is new babies. I mean, every time we hear this word, I mean, about new, we ought to remind us, hey, this is good news. Gospel is reunited friendships, restored relationship. Gospel is peacemaking all around us all the time. The gospel is everywhere, just as the angel points it out to us. And secondly, I think there's some connection here between Zechariah's fears and his apparent punishment, because that's the way I always looked at it. I just seen Gabriel stomping his foot and saying, you hard-headed knucklehead, Zechariah, I'm closing off your mouth, God's punishments. And that's kind of the way we look at things in the Bible. God's punishment, God's punishment, God's punishment. Boy, you don't believe. And I'm thinking, I don't know about you, but I mean, I would compare myself to Zechariah and I would think, well, why did Mary, she asked the same question, how can these things be? And she runs off and everything is Mary, is favor. And then Zechariah asked the same question, how will I know this? And he gets his, he can't speak for a little while and Mary's just going off hunky-dory. Don't seem fair to me, guys. I don't know about you. Maybe you don't read the scriptures like I do, but it don't seem fair to me. Why is God punishing one and not the other one? Now, we've already established that Zechariah's real fear is not the angel standing there, not Gabriel standing there. Zechariah still can't get his head around the idea of God intervening for him, God listening to him. I mean, he's like, sure, I'm talking to an angel, but would God really listen to my prayer? Would God really hear me? And I'm saying that because I want you to hear this, because I believe that part of his imposed period of prolonged listening is part of his healing. Because we never see that part, do we? All we see is God is punishing. God is healing. God is always healing because God is good. God is love. So what's he doing? I mean, what is the problem with Zechariah? Zechariah's problem is, his fear is, God doesn't listen to him. God doesn't really care. So he needs to be healed of this. Sometimes when we come to believe that we are not heard, what we actually need is less speaking and more listen. I tell my kids that all the time. And they're like, Dad, I'm listening to you. And I said, no, you're not, because you're talking. You cannot do both at the same time. I mean, you just can't. In order to listen, what does the scripture, be still? What is that being still part? Stand real still? That being still means hush and listen. And Zechariah, all he's got going on, all is noise in his head. Why would God hear me? Why would God listen to me? Maybe it's my fault. And this is over and over and over. So what you really need, Zechariah, as part of your healing is some quiet time. So really, this is not a punishment of God. This is a blessing of God. I'm going to give you some quiet time. But again, it's not always the case. I can read in the scripture where God knows what we need before we even know how to ask. He knows what we need. And that's why he deals with Zechariah one way. That's why he deals with Mary in another way. Because sometimes maybe you need to get loud. Maybe you need to advocate for yourself. Remember the woman with the issue of blood? We could tell the story and say, well, she just sat over there and prayed. She said, I'm going to touch the hem of his garments. I don't care what the line looks like. I don't care what the press looks like. I'm going to elbow people out of the way. Sometimes that's it. Sometimes it's be still. Sometimes what we need is to get quiet enough to notice the good news that is around us right now. And especially at Christmas, sometimes silence is golden. Just to sit back and become aware of all the good that is near us. Except the story for Zechariah and Elizabeth, it's not quite over yet. Just as their son John will lead the way for Jesus, in some way Elizabeth is now going to do the same for Mary. And I've only got just a couple more minutes here. We'll be done. When Mary becomes pregnant, her first thought as an unwed pregnant woman is to skip town. You think about it, unwed pregnant woman. She wants to avoid the prying eyes. She wants to avoid the nosy neighbors. Maybe what her fiance is going to be thinking, and all of this stuff. All of this going on in Nazareth. She's got to get out of town. So she heads to a small town, the hillside of Judea, to the home of her cousin Elizabeth. And she greets her. Now, let me read this, verse 39. Now at the time Mary set out and went in a hurry to the hill country, to a city of Judea. Now, she don't know what's going on. She enters into the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. It doesn't say she greeted Zechariah, because how's she going to greet him? He can't talk. He's sitting in a corner. Do you just wave at him? Old Zechariah, he just, hi, I'm glad to see you. And when Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb, And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. And she cried out with a loud voice, saying, Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of your womb. And how has it happened to me that the mother of my Lord would come to me? For behold, when the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby leaped in my womb for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what had been spoken to her by the Lord. And guys, this is our story this week on our way towards Christmas. An old, childless, though blameless couple who fear that they've been forgotten, fear that God has forsaken them, who wonder if maybe they've done something wrong, maybe it's their fault, who struggle to believe that God would even bother to listen to them, is greeted by the words of God. Do not be afraid, you are heard, you are beloved, your prayers have not gone unanswered. In fact, your good news is part of the good news, the beginning of peace that even the prophet Isaiah once dreamt of. And here's the really beautiful part of it for me, because we always talk about this expression. The first expression of all of that good news, all the good news that has come to Zechariah and that has come to Elizabeth, even before John the Baptist is born, the first expression is a warm home for a scared Mary to land in. Think about that. Everything good that will eventually come to Zechariah and Elizabeth in their long years, year after year of waiting, all of that is immediately made available for Mary. Because their good news, it takes root in their heart with their good news, Zechariah and Elizabeth. And they start to believe it. This little seed, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die. But this little seed, this little grain of good news has started to take root. And then doors are open and family is welcomed in the moment when someone is terrified of her own story. Because remember, Mary doesn't know what she's a young girl. Immediately when this happens to her, what's she do? She's out of town. Why? She's scared. And she needs to go to Zechariah and Elizabeth so that she can be encouraged and go back and stand and know that what she bears is really the Messiah. This is how these things work out. Because that's the good news. That's what good news does. It comes to us. It takes root in us. It changes us. And then it is passed along. Even as the waters cover the sea. And may you know today that you are loved, that you've not been forgotten, even when the story takes twists and turns that you didn't expect. May you notice the good news when it comes near to you. And quiet enough to notice it in the moments that may have slipped by. And may your blessing overflow to someone else who needs it. And that's the story of Christmas. And we will quit with that right there.